Welcome to our community. Susie Thomas with you this morning. We're happy to welcome Marianne Mozak. She is from Ascend. It is a sexual risk avoidance education program in Northeast Ohio. Good morning.
Good morning.
All right. I very carefully said sexual risk avoidance education. I did not say abstinence education. Marianne, why was that?
Well, I'm very glad you're asking that question because it's important that people understand some new language surrounding this topic. And we do use the term sexual risk avoidance because this is actually based on a public health model, a public primary prevention. And it's really a risk avoidance primary prevention message. And this is how we treat other risk behaviors, especially with adolescents, if it's involved with drugs or drinking or smoking, etc. We basically have a primary prevention message that said, look, if you're not involved in this risk behavior, don't start. Mm-hmm. And if you are involved, let's help get you back to a risk-free status. Mm-hmm. So that's our primary public health message for risk behavior. And since the CDC has deemed teen sex as risk behavior, we believe that it's very appropriate and accurate to call our program sexual risk avoidance education.
Do you talk about consequences?
We certainly do. We have a saying here that sex is always about more than sex. It has to include life impact. If a teen becomes a parent, that has a definite impact on whether or not they'll be able to finish their education, pursue goals, career orientations, whatever. It has tremendous impact. And not only in that realm, but it also has impact in emotional and social well-being. Mm-hmm. So we do describe our programs as being holistic, talking about the whole person. And so that holism is a really strong part of any sexual risk avoidance program.
Yes. One thing I certainly remember when my own boys were in high school was when they each had to carry around a 5-pound bag of flour and take good care of it and treat it as if it were their own little baby, and they were never allowed to have it out of their sight. And, does that work? And it was amazing where I was finding that thing,
Mm-hmm. Yes,
kind of.
I can imagine.
Yes.
Right.
And does it work? And then also, you don't want it to make the baby the bad guy,
Right.
So
right.
How do you handle that?
Well, first of all, we have to acknowledge the fact that adolescents are really concrete thinkers. That prefrontal cortex, which actually guides judgment, is not fully developed in adolescence. Mm-hmm. And we don't see that development be complete till somewhere around 21 to 25 years old. And so making the consequences of teen sex, the possible consequences, mm-hmm. As concrete as possible is a good way to help them learn. And again, and I certainly concur with you that the baby is not the bad guy or the problem,
right?
But it is. But the child that is born is a very, very important,
yes.
part of life. This is someone's life,
yes.
unique life, and it all speaks to how very important understanding the power of sexual intimacy in creating a whole new life is. And so, it's really a dance. It's, the consequences, not only with pregnancy, but STDs also. There are
yes.
30 sexually transmitted diseases now. Years and years ago, we had 2, which people could typically name,
right.
Gonorrhea and syphilis.
Exactly.
But, yeah. So these are real things that you feel in your body that you experience. So, in addition to saying that our programs are holistic, we also describe them as being reality-based. Okay?
And what does that mean?
Well, basically, and I think, anybody listening here would agree that it's really easy in our 24/7 internet culture to get the idea that sex is all glamour and no consequence. So it's kind of an airbrushed picture that's given. You see celebrities, having children. They may not be married or married, and everything is all fine. And it looks like, well, that's not such a big deal. Of course, they don't really tell you that celebrity has millions and millions of dollars to support that child. So what we try to do is simply bring the reality to the fact that if you become a teen parent, you have a very, you have a serious obligation.
Yes.
So we take off some of that Hollywood airbrushed image that is portrayed about casual or hookup sex, and make it a real issue.
And it becomes an issue in their world. Like, what do I do with this baby while I have basketball practice? They just have to answer that question in their own reality.
Right, exactly.
Perhaps the most effective thing that happened, it was a rough road for one family, but there was a young lady who became pregnant, and I know for our kids to see her, they were thinking of her always as this very popular, very petite, very little thing. See the path of a difficult pregnancy, a difficult delivery, that spoke volumes. That was someone else's pain that really educated the rest of the kids at the school, I would say. But you don't want to see anybody have to go through that, do you? If we could help them all avoid that, that would be the best, wouldn't it?
Right, and that's exactly the word that you just used there was avoid. And that's why we call it sexual risk avoidance education.
So what takes place? What do you do in the classes? What do you do with the students?
Well, one thing we have to acknowledge, okay, that students, young adolescents that are going through puberty, they do need to have an education on what's happening to their bodies, on the whole reproductive anatomy. We're very much into that they need information. They need good information. And we always want to portray sexual intimacy as a natural part of human development, right?
Yes.
It's a good thing.
Right.
But it's also something that has some very, very important consequences. And there's a context for sex, all right? So we start out our classes helping them, just understand what's going on in their bodies, the changes, either they're going through puberty or they're prepubescent, and so what to look for, and kind of all of that those basic things. And then, we talk about healthy relationships. Very important topic now because there's so much dating violence and sexual assault, etc. So what does a healthy relationship look like? And it's unfortunate, but many of our young people don't, really have an opportunity to see good relationships. So just modeling for that, and letting them do role play and talking about their own feelings is pretty important in terms of what we're talking about in terms of content in one of those programs. And then helping them to create boundaries, real boundaries, because, it's interesting. There's really a tension between what's going on sometimes in their head and what's going on in their heart. And we call it head-heart confusion, because in their head they feel like what they're seeing around them is, everyone's doing it, which, by the way, is not true. Which I'd like to share with that in a moment about that. But they have a conflict that I have to engage in sexual activity because it's kind of a rite of passage as a teen, and I want to be cool and I want to be in the in crowd. But in their heart of hearts, often when you really talk to them one-on-one, they're really not interested in engaging in sexual activity. They're very ambivalent. They're unsure of that. And we are able then to come alongside and actually help them to kind of think through those aspects of a healthy relationship or sexual intimacy. And again, we talk about pregnancies, STDs, emotional consequences, and many people believe, and it's because it's been a false narrative that is out there, is that we don't talk about contraception. And it's simply not true. We have examined, when I say we, I mean the organization Ascend, of which I'm a director of. We have looked at the 5 most widely used sexual risk avoidance programs across the country, curricula, and they all talk about contraception, the methods, the efficacy rate, and the limitations of it. And it's a real look. It's medically accurate. So that's covered. The benefits of marriage, we talk about the benefits of marriage and poverty prevention.
Yes.
So these are really strong themes in almost every sexual risk avoidance program. Media influence and dangers.
Oh, I'm going consent, there. Yes.
Parent-child engagement's another topic.
Good. Before we move on, I definitely want to talk about the media next, but before we move on to that, isn't there something more about 2 people honestly becoming one once you have become physically intimate? So whether or not you are using contraception, that is a very real union that's taking place, that now if you go on to date others, you're taking that person with you. Once you break up, it is devastating to break up when you're in high school. If you've been physically intimate with someone, it is devastating to break up. Do you talk about that? That you might feel like you're in love, but this might not be a forever kind of love.
Well, yes, to your point, exactly. We have, as a culture, we've tried to separate out emotions and intimacy, okay? An intimate relation. We've tried to separate the emotions and make it casual, hookup sex, sex with no attachment. And it is, it's really a kind of an exercise in futility, simply because human beings are simply not made that way.
Right.
We're not, our emotions are part of who we are. And becoming that intimate with another person, you do carry that with you.
Yeah, casual.
There's no such thing as casual sex.
No, 2 mutually exclusive terms.
Yes, exactly. Very well said.
Let's talk about media. We're being told exactly opposite of what you are saying this morning. In fact, there's a new movie out where the girls are getting ready to go to prom, and it is their goal to lose their virginity at prom. I don't remember anyone saying that when we were all going to prom, but this makes it sound like, okay, as you said, a rite of passage. What is the message for our young people out there right now?
Yeah. Well, our message is that teen sex is normal and that it's presented as an expectation, and they think that everyone is doing it. But I would really, I hope if there are parents listening, they can hear this, because this is an amazing statistic. Kids today are having less sex than they did 25 years ago. And that data comes from the CDC. Every 2 years, our federal government does what's called a youth risk behavior survey. And they have all kinds of risk behaviors listed there. And you can see from 1991 to 2015, there has been a 28% increase in the number of high school students waiting for sex. So that is such good news.
Yes.
And we would argue that news is so good that it really is important that we, as the adult community responsible for these young people, continue to reinforce those good decisions they're making.
Absolutely. 2 things come to mind. Teens are not writing those scripts that we're seeing in theaters. Those are being written by adults as if they're able to speak for teens. So that everybody's doing it is not coming from teens. It's coming from the adults writing for teens. And then to my second point, why? Do we know why that kids are not becoming physically intimate as early as they did 25 years ago? Why?
Well, that's a great question, and I've been asked that question a lot lately, especially. But we don't have data on it.
Mm.
Some people are postulating that it's because they're on their phones and they're connecting on their devices.
So who has time?
Yeah, really, they don't have time. They're looking down at their phones, and or they're staying at home, and there's increased isolation. Which there are some studies that do show increased isolation and loneliness related to being on the internet and device use.
Oh dear.
But we don't know why. But I will tell you this. There have been, in the last decade, we spent $1 billion, I think it was $977 million in the last decade, on condom-centered education for students.
Mm-hmm.
And after the HHS, after they looked at the findings of those programs that were created under the last administration, they found that 80% of the programs failed to have any effect on the students.
As far as sexual activity, well, sure, it's permission.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there was no effect. And then there were 3 programs that actually increased sexual activity, increased teen pregnancy. I mean, had negative outcomes. So what am I actually trying to say here is that in all of this, effort to make condoms be the kind of the crown jewel of sex education, that just use a condom and you're safe, we see now less condom use than ever. Right? Starting in 2003, there has been a precipitous drop in condom use. So we're not even succeeding in helping that message get out, which is the one that is so promoted by our dominant culture and our media narrative.
Wow.
So I do concur that the media is creating this false narrative, and somehow the good news is that teens are not buying it.
They're not paying attention to it. That is good news. We need to take a short break. We're speaking with Marianne Mozak from Ascend, and we'll be back after these words. You're listening to Our Community.